Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Boris Tizenhausen with you. It's July 3rd. Here are the main news stories as of this moment. Well, let's start with some truly wonderful news. The SBU, or as we call it here, the Service of God, has for the second time this week struck fighter jets at the Saki airfield and targeted the hangars at the Vardiiska air base. This is in occupied Crimea. In general, locals reported that there were several dozen explosions. At the Saki airfield, Su-30SM, Su-30, and Su-24 fighter jets and frontline bombers were hit. They were inside hangars there, but that was no obstacle for our drones. Preliminary reports indicate that at least 7 aircraft were destroyed or damaged. This is truly a black day for Russian aviation. This is already the second strike by the SBU on the Saki airfield in just the past few days. The first time, as I understand it, they were adjusting their aim, and they did so very, very successfully. At the military airfield in Vardiiska, 2 hangars were hit, where the Russians stored Shahed drones and aviation equipment. And I would also like to remind you that every day, elements of the air defense system are being destroyed on the occupied peninsula. Every single day. And without fuel and electricity, it will be very, very difficult for the Russians in occupied Crimea. But more on that a bit later. There's a lot of interesting stuff there as well. Gasoline is running out in Russian cities. Here's today's news, for example. In Novorossiysk, gasoline has run out, and at gas stations, fuel is only available with coupons. In other words, for private individuals and their cars, there is no more gasoline in Novorossiysk. Just to put it in perspective, more than 500,000 Russians live in that area. Although Putin recently claimed that there are enough reserves and that the shortage is, absolutely non-critical. While this underground madman is rambling and Matvienko is asking people not to escalate the situation, Russians are facing a completely different reality. And this reality is nothing like the one they're being shown on television. The city of Chita, Russia, Zabaikalsky Krai is more than 5,000 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. A gigantic line at the gas station. The wait time in this line can reach up to 2 days. Just imagine that. Let's take a look at this line. See how things can be? And what is it for? A line for gas, not for Berlin, no, not for Washington. Probably the most epic shot would be if those old wrecks with the slogans "To Berlin," "To Washington," and a pipe on the roof shaped like a rocket were standing in this line. Now that would be a picture, just the embodiment of modern Putin's Russia. We'd already be in Berlin by now, but we're just a little short on fuel. And now here is the information our team managed to obtain. So how are they going to save Chita and the entire Zabaikalsky Krai from this fuel crisis? Information has emerged that starting today, Russia is closing a major border crossing with China, in effect shutting down a huge logistics hub, the Zabaikalsk-Manjuli border crossing. The locals are in shock. No one is explaining anything to them or commenting on the situation. Logistics companies also have no idea what to do or where to send their trucks now. Meanwhile, the local authorities remain silent. As is typical for the Russian Federation, there are no comments at all. But they are not closing this border crossing completely. There are exceptions. It is being closed to everyone except fuel tankers. In other words, they are now essentially dedicating this entire border crossing to fuel tanker traffic, while closing it to all other cargo. In fact, they are clearing the border crossing for emergency fuel deliveries from China, and now a stream of fuel tankers will be coming through this checkpoint from China. This is despite the fact that the main part of Russia's overland trade with China passes through Zabaikalsk. So do you see what they're sacrificing? Additionally, they are sending 2 more shunting diesel locomotives to the railway border crossing there. So they will be hauling tank cars and driving fuel tankers through. Apparently they've reached an agreement with China. They are going to move large volumes of fuel, planning to put out the disaster with gasoline from China. Well. By the way, thanks to the Russians for the information about this border crossing. They passed it on. Let me remind you, the crisis in Chita began quite recently, in mid-June, so literally just a couple of weeks ago. On June 25th, a state of heightened alert was already declared there. The limit is 15 liters per tank. And by July 1st, gas stations were already selling gasoline by coupons and fuel cards, and some types of fuel were completely withdrawn from sale for individuals. That's how it goes. There, garbage trucks in several districts simply stopped. They have nothing to transport the trash with. That's how the bald underground guy managed things. Well, it's clear that in this kind of manual control mode, it's impossible to eliminate the catastrophe across all of Russia. Russia is sinking into this fuel chaos. And a big hello not only to the Transbaikal territory, but also to Moscow. In the near future, Muscovites can expect a lot of surprises. Everything that the Russian Federation is contracting and purchasing right now will be delivered in at least, well, at the very minimum, a week or even several weeks. And that's exactly what we're lacking right now. What Russia has contracted for now will only be enough for literally a couple of days of total Russian consumption. And by that time, Ukrainian drones will have taken out several more major Russian oil refineries. In other words, with its fuel purchases, Russia isn't even compensating for the loss of refining capacity. Not in any way. By the way, do you remember that recently Matvienko said, "Oh, there's no need to overly dramatize this situation with gasoline, with diesel. It's not so catastrophic." Do you know when she said that? It was when someone from the audience, representing the agricultural sector, told her that due to the lack of fuel, Russia is now going to lose everything in agriculture that has been built up over decades. To which the seasoned cyborg Komsomol member, Matvienko, replied, "Oh, there's no need to dramatize." Well, really, why should she care? Is her black caviar going to disappear from the table? No. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important for the channel's promotion. You can do it right now without putting it off. We're fighting Putin's propaganda, but together we'll be much more successful at it. And let me remind you, everyone who subscribes to the channel gets soft and silky hair. So make sure to subscribe. In occupied Crimea, Russians are facing major problems. I would say very big, gigantic problems. Like problems as big as the line for gasoline in Chita. Just overnight, drones attacked dozens of substations in Crimea. And this is happening every night now. 48 hours ago, drone forces struck 10 substations in occupied Crimea. Ozerninskoye, Rodnikovoye, Vypasnoye, Donuslav, Kariernoye, Miteyevo, Feodosiskoye, Okotnikovo, Shirokoye, and Zapadno-Krimskoye. Everyone there is in shock. Dozens of substations are simply getting hit. And just last night, Belogorsk, Marianovka, Stary Krim, Jankoy, Zagorodnoye, Saki. Well, basically, they keep hitting and hitting and hitting. The result is already visible on the power outage schedule. Of course, civilian facilities are suffering because the power is being redistributed and military facilities are given priority. Some electric transport has been stopped. Basically, the goal isn't just to turn off the lights once, but to make the peninsula less suitable for the Russian army's military logistical functions and increasingly expensive to hold. That is, regardless of whether a formal network collapse happens or not. In other words, with each passing day, Crimea is becoming more and more expensive for Putin to hold. And as far as I understand, right now the distribution network is being worn down, and at some point it could simply collapse. A note to the occupiers, to those who say, "Relax guys, everything will be fine, don't worry, they'll fix everything soon." Here's a note for the occupiers. The Balaklava and Tavricheskaya thermal power plants provide about 50% of Crimea's electricity, and another 40% comes from the energy bridge from Russia, which recently caught fire. That is, both of these thermal power plants operate on Western turbines. If they go out of service, that's it, game over. No one will be able to fix them. And when things get really bad, what does the Kremlin do? They send some official to Crimea to show that everything is under control, someone they wouldn't mind losing if a drone happens to show up. So, the Russian Federation's Minister of Defense, Belousov, arrived in Crimea and met there with the local ghouls, Aksionov and Razvozhayev. They, and I quote, discussed the current situation on the peninsula. They shot some footage there, apparently. They're all sitting there like at a party meeting, staring at the same spot. You know, I like this part. Belousov inspected the troops and forces of the Black Sea Fleet. So why are you inspecting them in Crimea? Did no one report to Belousov that the Black Sea Fleet had fled to Novorossiysk? Or were they filming somewhere again at the Mosfilm studio? Well, there is also information that some heads of the occupied territories and local security service chiefs in occupied Crimea have been instructed to prepare the removal of documents. This is reported by the Atesh partisans. The occupation administrations of Kerchi and Feodosia are preparing to remove documents by July 4th. If you, friends, have any information on this topic, send it to us at the email address listed in the channel description, but only if it is safe for you to do so. Only in that case. I'm actually waiting for the Kremlin to finally decide to completely shut off the internet for Russians so they can't see the real picture. There are just hundreds, thousands of videos being recorded by Russians in shock. What's going on? Well, I think that judging by everything, they'll probably shut it down soon because it's physically impossible to hide this global disaster. It feels like the internet might be heavily restricted for Russians after the elections in the fall. Maybe at that time there will also be a more active mobilization, but it won't save either Putin or his regime. Ukraine is showing nothing short of miracles of heroism. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today, we are continuing to raise funds for electronic warfare equipment for the 33rd Assault Regiment, which is defending in the Zaporizhzhia direction. Our assault troops, who are always the first to face the enemy. The fighters need electronic warfare equipment to protect themselves from Russian drones, vehicle-mounted EW, trench EW, and individual EW systems. I think everyone understands that for the assault troops, these EW systems are literally a matter of life and death. Well, we've already covered 2/3 of the fundraising goal. The fighters have recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
Ми бійці 33-го окремого штурмового полку, що воює зараз на Запорізькому напрямку. Сьогодні на фронті технології змінюються дуже швидко. Противник активно використовує FPV та розвідувальні дрони, НРК. Тому нам постійно доводиться адаптуватися та посилювати захист. Одним з найефективніших рішень є засоби радіоелектронної боротьби, які дозволяють подавляти сигнали керування дронами та захищати бійців та техніку. Звертаємося по допомогу до спільноти Бориса Тизенгаузена. Штурмовикам потрібні окопний реп, автомобільний реп та індивідуальний реп для захисту бійців та техніки. Кожен такий засіб – це шанс зберегти життя воїнів та техніку. Дякуємо всім і кожному. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Let's help our fighters from the 33rd Regiment. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There are mono, Privat, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. If you're watching on another channel, there's a QR code as well, which also leads to the fundraiser. And a huge thank you for supporting our defenders. Thank you from me and from the hundreds of warriors you have already helped. The Unified History textbook in the Russian Federation has been amended again and again. It seems like they rewrite history there every 6 months or so. So, look, in this Unified History textbook, there's now less criticism of the USA, and it talks about the positive role of Donald Trump. In other words, they're praising Donald Trump. Just so you understand, rewriting history is basically their national pastime. So what exactly did they change there? Significant changes were made to the chapter Russia Today. In particular, the subsection Pressure on Russia from the USA is now simply called Pressure on Russia. And mentions of the United States in a negative context have been replaced with the collective West. So it's not the United States that's bad, but rather some kind of collective West. So now school children will also learn about the positive role Donald Trump played in the peaceful settlement. The authors of the textbook point out that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine would not have happened if Trump had been president in 2022. Oh, wow. Can you imagine that? I still don't understand how this is possible, how this fits in the minds of Russians. The USA is the founder of NATO, and Russia, according to Putin and others, basically completely deranged figures, is fighting against NATO. But at the same time, Russia is not fighting the USA, the founder and backbone of NATO. And Trump is a good guy. How do they reconcile this in their heads? The collective West, but not quite the West. The USA, but not quite the USA. How do they manage to reconcile this? I came across a wonderful piece of news today. In Orsk, which is in the Orenburg region, the fuel trucks have run out of gasoline. More than 100 fuel trucks are standing idle without fuel. Can you imagine hearing this kind of news before the full-scale invasion, that Russia itself, would simply plunge into a fuel crisis? In 4 regions of Russia, officials have started to be served at gas stations out of turn, according to the Russian publication 7 by 7. According to the publication, such cases have been recorded in the Saratov, Volgograd, and Chelyabinsk regions, as well as in the Krasnodar territory. At certain gas stations, gasoline is sold to official vehicles without waiting in line and to government employees upon presentation of their IDs. What is going on? How is this even possible? Seriously, Russians? Are you really going to put up with this? Ah, right, I forgot who I'm asking. So who's going to end up paying for all this? Of course, it will be ordinary Russians. So, in the State Duma, I think the collective sound of their minds blowing is already audible here. The State Duma declared that voting against United Russia is a vote for Zelensky. This is not a joke. The deputy chairman of the State Duma Committee on Information Policy, Oleg Matveychik, stated that voting against the United Russia Party in the upcoming elections, after which Putin will disconnect the internet and possibly announce, well, not announce, but start mobilization. So, voting against United Russia will mean supporting Zelensky. Essentially, the Russian voter now faces a simple choice. Whose side are they on, Putin's or Zelensky's? If they're with Putin, let them vote for United Russia. But they're absolutely out of their minds. If they're with Zelensky, let them vote against United Russia. There is no other option. We've heard all this somewhere before. We've even seen it somewhere. Orban also tried to play this game. Either me or Zelensky, remember? I think you remember how it all ended. You might as well put up billboards of Zelensky like Orban did. The fuel crisis is turning into a social crisis. VT Siom has recorded the sharpest drop in Putin's ratings in 8 years. Well, you know, VT Siom is hardly a reliable barometer. But even they couldn't ignore a 4-point drop in the ratings over just a few days. So I think Putin's real rating is actually much lower. They just needed to create at least some semblance of reality, even if only a little bit. It just wouldn't make sense if Vitsayam wrote that, amid the fuel crisis, Russians rallied together and started supporting Putin even more. The thing is, Russians still don't understand the ultimate goal of the war. Why are the ratings dropping? Why are Russians dissatisfied? If they were told, for example, we just need to endure a little, tighten our belts, stand in lines for 3 months or half a year, but it's all for the sake of, in half a year, defeating Ukraine, reaching Kiev, and so on. But they're not being told anything. And many Russians never knew what the goals of this war were in the first place. And everyone understands that no one will ever reach Kiev anymore. At this point, they should be worried about someone not reaching Moscow instead. And presenting some little-known, unfamiliar to Russians names of settlements in Ukraine as a victory, that's not much of a victory. Someone living out there in Chita or Bryansk or Voronezh doesn't understand why he has to stand in line for gasoline for an entire day in the heat, just for the sake of some Ukrainian village. He already has plenty of villages like that where he lives. Russia is the largest country in the world, 17 million square kilometers. Why does he need this Ukrainian village, which has already been turned into a pile of scorched bricks? So why does he need this? And no one tells them anything because Putin doesn't consider it necessary to inform Russians at all. He thinks to himself, I know everything. You just keep quiet over there. Your job is to work. That's the kind of attitude they have. So why doesn't Putin end the war? You'd think he would, right? From a rational point of view, the war should have ended long ago. The losses should have been recorded, as they say in business. But this isn't about being rational. Probably everyone knows an old man like that who's kind of lost his marbles. These old men make their neighbors' lives miserable under some made-up pretext, like claiming their neighbors are poisoning them with gas or irradiating them. Now imagine an old man like that, but at the helm of an entire country and with nuclear weapons on top of it. So in his mind, someone is always attacking him. Some kind of West is attacking, Ukraine is attacking, everyone is attacking him. Who's even bothering you? You Botox jellyfish, just sit in your underground bunkers, play with your little cobayons, sing songs with them in Chinese. Leave us alone, just get off our backs. By the way, many researchers of authoritarian regimes note that dictators tend to share several traits. Years of isolation, which leads not just to prolonged isolation, but also to a narrow circle of people who constantly reinforce his views, even if those views are completely, idiotic and detached from reality. And that's when he simply starts to, become paranoid. That is, he, Putin, is convinced that there is a massive conspiracy against his country. That's a fact. Although, if you tell him, listen, before the annexation of Crimea, you were always in the center of the main photos. World leaders stood next to you. They bought your oil at market prices. Everyone came to visit you. You traveled as well. No, it's a conspiracy. You all want to take away my precious. Well, there you have it. And the older he gets, is just all over. Botox is just wandering around inside that skull of his, that's all. You can see it yourself. Sometimes he freezes up, he starts spouting nonsense, he can't even read the teleprompter. And unfortunately, that's the kind of neighbor we have. Well, here's another piece of news from the series How Putin Lifted Russia Off Its Knees. Kazakhstan has allowed Russians to refuel at their gas stations, but has banned taking gasoline out in canisters. Can you even imagine that? Well, okay, Kazakhstan, fine, whatever. All right, we'll allow the citizens of the great oil and gas nation to refuel in Kazakhstan, but nah, no hauling gasoline away in canisters from here. Do you realize what Putin has done to the Russian Federation? Soon, Russians will be allowed to cross the border just to buy groceries and bread because everything will run out in Russia. That's how rapidly the Russian Federation is hurtling toward the abyss. But we won't stop it. In fact, we'll even press the pedal to speed it up. And you, friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And let's help our assault troops from the 33rd Regiment. The link to donate is in the description of this video. We have just a little bit left to go. Let's all come together. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.